What is up, you guys? Welcome to Illumination Lab. My name is Justin, and today I'll be showing you how to set up product shots in Cinema4d and Redshift. We'll start by setting up our product label, then we'll replicate a studio environment, and finally we'll get into how to create professional looking renders. I'm excited for this one. This is gonna be a fun one today. So without further delay, let's get into it. Alright, so getting started here in Cinema4d. First thing what we're going to do is just grab in a disk that is going to essentially be our floor, and then we are going to grab a plane and just push this plane back a little past this disk here, and then this is just going to be our backdrop for us here. And then next up, what we're going to do is just pull in a tall boy. So I'm going to go into Grayscale Gorilla, select the tall boy here, and then just bring this in. Next up, what I'm going to do is just get into proper perspective here. So I'm just going to change my camera angle here and just zoom in a bit. And then I'm just going to bring in a Redshift camera here and select our Redshift camera. And what I'm going to do is just type in 200 into our focal length. The reason why I do that is typically in studio environments or professional photographers can often have just a longer focal length to kind of isolate the object and also to really focus on details. So to get that studio like effect, we're just going to go ahead and push that to 200 here. And then what I'll do here as well is I'll just kind of set up our camera and our product here just so we can kind of see a nice reflection on the ground here. I'm thinking to have some sort of nice reflective look. And then what we'll do as well is we'll kind of play around with some lighting just to kind of create a nice looking visual here. So what I'm going to do is just take our can and rotate it a bit, and this is going to have a kind of a cool looking initial shot here where our can is kind of hovering above the surface, but it's somewhat close to the surface, so we get this nice highlight at the bottom here. So we're just going to do that here initially, and I'm just setting up this camera here just to see what kind of angle I want it at. Next up, what I'm going to do is just go and grab a Redshift material here. And then I'm just going to apply that to our plane here. And then what I'm going to do as well is just I'm going to copy and paste our tall boy here just in case we need a backup. And then I'm just going to hide that as well. All right, so a couple things we're going to do here. I'm just going to go in here and bring in my beer label. Now, I did import this in from Canva. I did play around with it a little bit, but I didn't essentially make this, but this is just a good example for you guys here. And then what we're going to do as well is we're going to go into Grayscale Gorilla, and they have these nice frosted textures here. So we're just going to kind of bring that in to kind of create a cool looking effect here. I'm just going to bring that in to our node editor here. And then what we'll need is a bump map as well. And I'm just going to connect our texture into our bump map and our bump map into our material here. Cool, so I'm gonna exit out of that, press play. All right, so next thing we're going to do is just get a Redshift render tag, and we are going to turn on both our geometry and displacement. And the reason why we're doing that is we want to kind of show the displacement that comes from that frosted texture that we brought in. And so in order to kind of show that properly, we do have to turn on our displacement here. So looking pretty good here. So next thing what we're going to do is just kind of play around with our material here. And so you can see as I kind of play with this offset, our can is kind of stretched. And then of course with this other one, we can kind of turn this and it kind of stretches out the UV lengths. And so what we can do is just kind of play around with some of these numbers here just so we can fit this material a little better. And so depending on the size of the PNG that you bring in, or even sometimes the size of your surface, you might have to kind of play around with this just to get the correct look. But as you can see here, we have UV mapping on, and then of course, like I said, we're playing around with these UVs just to kind of get a nice look here. So right about here is looking pretty good. I would like to have the illumination lab at the top, but at the same time have the artisan draft beer at the bottom. And yeah, right there is looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and give it a quick save here. Cool. And then I'm just going to take our Redshift tag and then just move that up to our subdivision surface. All right, so next up, we're going to play with some lighting. So I'm just going to bring in a area light, and immediately you can kind of see that within the render view. And then I'm just going to kind of push this back onto our wall here. I'm just going to kind of decrease our exposure, and then I'm just going to kind of adjust our light here. And really the effect that I'm making is I want to have some sort of bright light near the bottom, and then have the light kind of gradually dissipating as well. So next up, I'm going to bring in another material. I'm going to apply that to our disc, and then what I'm going to do is just turn up the metalness. So essentially with that, we're creating a nice reflective look. And I think having that metalness there will kind of help with really playing around with some of the lighting. And of course, we can always take this material and put this onto our back plane here. And by doing that, that's just going to kind of change how the light is interacting with this material. And then you can always go and just kind of play with the exposure depending on what you want. But for now, we're just going to have the material on our disc here. So I'm just going to delete that off of there. Cool. So next up, I'm going to bring in a dome light, and then we're going to find a cool HDRI in Grayscale Gorilla. So as you can see, they have a lot of these HDRIs, but I'm just going to go down here to the studio ones here. What's fun about this is you can insert some of these into our path here and just kind of see how it interacts within the Redshift render view. And again, depending on what you're going for, I'm sure there's a option for you here. Of course, it doesn't have to be Grayscale Gorilla. There's tons of different ways to get HDRIs in here, but I'm just using these guys as part of the example here. So I'm just going to continue to look here and kind of see which one kind of works best. I'm gonna crank this down to -2. I'm gonna bring that back to 0. Just kind of see what this one looks like. And by going through this process, you kind of see what each individual HDRI does. And so if you're trying to go for like a warmer tone, they have something for that, a cooler tone as well too, or just some sort of key light or some sort of highlight in general. So you can always do that, and then you can always rotate this as well. So if you kind of like the lights but you want to see it in a few different angles, you can always rotate your dome light as well too. So pretty cool there. So what I'm going to do is just use this one for right now. I'm just going to kind of zoom back into our label. And then I'm just going to select our disk and kind of bring this up just so you can kind of see the reflection at the bottom here. Cool. So that looks pretty good there. I'm just going to just adjust that. Awesome. So it looks pretty good so far. I'm just going to hop out of the camera here. We're going to bring in another area light. I'm going to bring this down to 5 and then just kind of pull this back and off to the side. And what I'm doing here is I just want to create this nice little light effect where we have one side here that is very bright, and then you could kind of see the curvature with the can here, with kind of seeing how the light kind of dissipates near the right side of this. And so we really want to kind of highlight the actual shape of the can here, and that's going to kind of bring a little bit more realism to our render here. Usually if we can get a good quality image or a good quality texture on our label and also have a really nice lighting setup, it's going to kind of help your render kind of pop out a little bit more and kind of bring that realism to your render here. So, and then just kind of change the position of the area lights, and then that's going to kind of give us different looks, just because the texture that we have here has kind of a different fall off versus our traditional lighting here. So I moved this off to the right here just to kind of see what that looks like. And then of course you could kind of toggle your lights on and off depending on what light does what, so you can kind of get an idea of how each light is kind of contributing to your shot here. So we're just going to bring in another area light here. I'm just going to kind of bring this off to the side, and then I'm just going to kind of solo this one and then just kind of play around with this. So with this one, I'm just trying to find a way to create a cool highlight here. So if you see here, like on the edges of the beer bottle, I have that nice kind of highlight showing, and so you could still kind of see that. So that kind of helps illuminate the frost texture that we have, and so that's a really cool touch. So even though this light isn't directly on our beer label, it is very much influencing how it looks though. So cool. So we are looking pretty good so far. Of course, we can always kind of play with our plane and kind of adjust that depending on how we want that in the shot, but that is looking pretty good so far. Next up, I'm just going to copy and paste our dome lights, and then like I said before, you can rotate these dome lights here just to kind of create different highlights or different effects. I'm actually going to delete this one here, and I'm just going to go back into our HDRIs and just apply that, and then just rotate this just to see how the lights kind of interact within the scene. I'm just going to kind of pump up the exposure, and then same with the intensity. Let me just bump this up to 4. And then a lot of times just playing with the lights, you can accidentally fall into different effects. And so, you know, feel free to kind of play around with it, see what happens. You might accidentally find something that you actually really do like. So always just kind of play around with it, see how it is. And then you can, you know, sometimes if you're not using it for this project, you can always use it for next time. But definitely play around with some of these while you're working on it, because you accidentally might find something that will make it into your final render. So definitely play around with this as you're kind of setting up your initial render, or even just setting up the scene in general. So all right, so next up, what we could do as well, if you look at the render view, you can kind of see the difference between our backdrop and our floor. So the difference between our plane and our disc. So you can kind of see that line there. If you don't want this, or if you just kind of want a different effect, you can always kind of change it here. What I'm going to do is just bring in an area light, and bring this back, shrink this down, and then I'm just going to kind of go to that area and just kind of lower the exposure here, but kind of gives us a nice illuminating look. Of course, there's ways to kind of get rid of that line altogether if you just want one seamless shot, but I think this right now kind of looks a little bit more dynamic, so I think I'm going to stick with this one here. All right, so next up, I'm just going to go to my camera here. I'm going to turn on bokeh and then bring in my subdivision surface. And really, I'm just trying to kind of focus in on this a little bit more so we can go and kind of play around with the offset here. And then you can kind of see that effect happening within the viewport here. And so, yeah, that's looking pretty good so far. Next up, what we could do, we're just going to hop in here, and then they have a lot of different LUTs in here within the Redshift render view. So depending on what kind of overall look you want, you can kind of play with that here. So there's a few different LUTs that kind of either really emphasize your highlights or really emphasize your contrast here, or apply, you know, different filters if you want something that is a little bit more warm or a little bit more dynamic. You can always kind of play with that within the render view here. This one here kind of makes everything pop a little bit more. So there's tons of options to kind of really hone in what you want this to look like, besides taking your render into a third-party program and just kind of tweaking it there. You can make some subtle changes here right in the viewport, which is pretty handy here. So the last thing I'm going to do is just go into my Redshift settings here. I'm just going to go over and select this one here. Of course, like I said, you could kind of play around with it depending on or what your client needs, but yeah, we're just going to kind of roll with this one and go from there. So that was pretty much it today. Pretty simple with this one. I just kind of wanted to show you how to apply a label on some sort of product. I wanted to kind of show you how to kind of set up the background as well, and then how kind of lighting really affects or even just enhances the scene there. So again, there's tons of ways to kind of achieve this. This is just one of many, so I hope that was somewhat helpful for you guys. But other than that, that's pretty much the end for this one today. You guys have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next one.